Dr. Jeffrey McCrae, and I'm the bassoon instructor at Colorado Mesa University. This etude in the key of B minor will test your ability to play a variety of chord outlines, wide intervals, and scalar patterns, both diatonic and chromatic scale fragments. There is a variety of articulation patterns here, so take care to be observant of all the articulation markings, staccato marks, slurs, and accents. In playing a wind instrument, we must be very careful in planning out when and how to breathe. It's not okay to just play till you feel like you need to breathe and then stop and grab a breath, which is something I often hear students do. Often, there are clues in the music that suggest where we should breathe. If we know how to read these clues, we can make smart decisions about where to breathe, especially if we can learn to recognize where one phrase ends and the next phrase begins. However, this etude doesn't give any obvious clues on where to breathe. First, you may have noticed that this etude does not have any rests, not one. Without a significant amount of study, or at least a very intuitive sense of the implied harmonies of this etude, it is not terribly easy to see in this etude where each phrase ends and the next one begins. Even so, depending on the tempo at which you are prepared to play this music, not every student is going to be able to get all of the way to the end of each phrase without needing to breathe. The best advice I can offer is this: plan out where you're going to breathe in accordance with the tempo you will perform the etude, and be consistent with those breaths. Mark them. You do not want to leave things to chance with your breaths. That being said, I would generally advise you to not breathe at any bar lines, as the consistent eighth notes in this etude tend to carry the musical motion forward across most of the bar lines. In most cases in this etude, I think the best place to possibly sneak a breath is after the first eighth note of a measure, especially when the next note is an octave leap from the first note. This occurs fairly regularly in the first half of this etude. Sneaking a breath in this manner is probably going to make it impossible to be completely metronomic throughout, but strive to get back into the tempo as quickly as you can after sneaking a breath. When you hear my performance of the etude, pay particularly close attention to how I manipulate the tempo by slowing down slightly as I approach bar 9 and again going into bar 14. I've chosen to do this as a means of showing where I believe the next phrase begins, but also to address the practical issue of how to get a sufficient breath that enables me to keep going. There are two other places where I may sneak a breath, so pay close attention to see if you can find them. Bear in mind that you may need to take more frequent breaths, especially if you take a slower tempo for your audition. I strongly urge you to start practicing this etude at a much slower tempo than 132. Slow practice is not only critical to working out the technique of your fingers, but also to work on the coordination between your fingers and your tongue. Be reminded that the all-state adjudicators would rather hear an audition that is under tempo and clean than one that is faster and messy. One problem I often hear from student bassoonists is that they try to play staccato notes as short as possible, and very little pitch or resonance to the individual notes are heard. As you practice this etude at a slow tempo, don't attempt to make the staccato notes as short as possible. Just make sure that they're separate. As you gradually increase the tempo, strive to ensure that the staccato notes have a clear center to the pitch and that they are clearly articulated. Keep the tongue relaxed and try not to strike the reed with your tongue. With this etude, we also need to be vigilant about notes that are prone to cracking. Cracking is a complex problem, and it can be due to a number of issues: airspeed, air pressure, reed problems, improper voicing, or finger technique. The range at the top of the staff in the bass clef from about F sharp to the C above the staff, or F sharp 3 to C4, is particularly prone to cracking, much of which can be addressed by better finger technique. I cannot overemphasize how much this needs to be worked out slowly. In some cases, cracking is due to an improperly sized half-hole opening or a failure to close the half-hole opening on notes that do not require a half-hole. In many cases, the size of the opening of the half-hole that one uses for F-sharp 3 needs to be slightly larger than what one uses for G3. This is an important aspect of finger technique that needs to be worked on deliberately and slowly in your undertempo practicing. For A3, B-flat 3, B3, and C4, it is possible to significantly reduce cracking by using the speaker keys, which is sometimes referred to as flicking or venting. If you're not yet familiar with the use of the speaker keys, this etude is a terrific opportunity for you to work on this skill. First, make sure that you're using the correct key for each of the various notes in this range. The high A key is used for A3. The high C key is used for B-flat 3, which in this etude is enharmonically spelled as A-sharp 3, B3, and C4. If you are playing consecutive notes that use the same speaker key, you can hold down the key for all of those notes. I strive to use the speaker keys anytime I am tonguing one of these notes. The speaker keys are also useful for smoothing out certain slurs that land on these notes, whether slurring from above or from below. Bear in mind that you still need to use proper airspeed and air pressure to get these notes to sound, but using the speaker keys correctly can significantly reduce cracking on the response of these notes. To achieve mastery with this skill, it is critical that you learn to move your left thumb in a deliberate, accurate, and efficient way. Therefore, it is important to eliminate any unnecessary tension in your left thumb. I recommend lots and lots of slow practice. Too often, I see young bassoonists struggle with using the speaker keys because they get attached to the whisper key, and then their thumb jerks upward toward a speaker key. This is usually due to unnecessary tension while pressing down the whisper key. You only need enough pressure to make the key go down. Any extra pressure only makes it more difficult to release the key. I find that very often, many of the problems bassoonists face with finger technique relate to how much pressure is being exerted through their fingers into the bassoon and its keys. It is also necessary to cultivate the ability to move your thumb slightly ahead of the rest of the fingers in order to cover the distance between the whisper key and the speaker keys, or vice versa. One often has to release the key a bit early while still playing the note in order to get to the key needed for the next note. It is very possible to learn to use the speaker keys with speed, accuracy, and an absence of unnecessary tension. However, this will only come through slow and deliberate practice and with a conscious emphasis on eliminating any unnecessary tension in your fingers. While in the process of learning this skill, I find it helpful to mark which notes require the speaker keys, and I would encourage you to mark every instance in this etude when you have to tongue an A3, an A-sharp 3, or a B3, as a reminder to strive to engage the appropriate speaker key in that moment. Another potentially problematic note in this etude is C-sharp 4. Many young bassoonists learn to play C-sharp 4 with a fingering that is nearly identical to what is commonly used for C-sharp 3, the octave lower, with the difference being to play C-sharp 4 without the whisper key. This is an acceptable fingering for C-sharp 4, but it may not necessarily be the best one. I find this short C-sharp 4 fingering to be a bit weak sounding, especially in comparison to the notes around it, and it isn't always the most responsive note, which can make it problematic in faster articulated patterns. Instead, I prefer to use another fingering, frequently referred to as the long or the full C-sharp. Granted, it will require some slow and deliberate practice to get used to using this fingering before you can get to a point where you feel comfortable using it at faster tempos. But I believe that it is worth it to have this fingering at your disposal. So here's the short C-sharp, which is 1, 2, 3, and the C-sharp key and the low D key. And the full C-sharp is 1, 2, 3, the C sharp key, and then basically every finger in your right hand. 1, 2, 3, low F, and B flat. You can hear that it's much more robust, and it matches the notes around it better versus the weaker short fingering. Observe how my left thumb moves as I play from the downbeat of measure 14 to the downbeat of measure 18 slowly. Pay particular attention to how my thumb moves independently or slightly earlier from my other fingers. This is only cultivated with regular, slow practice. However, it also needs to be stated that when playing C sharp, the thumb needs to stay on the C sharp key for the entire duration of the note. So leaving early isn't an option in those cases. Now I'll demonstrate the entire etude.